All right, welcome back to AM Live. And the question I was asking, which I will now give Nudin Hagai opportunity to respond to, is what you make of this front page story on the Star. Ruto hidden cards in talks with Raila Framework Agreement, says a final talks report will be tabled in Parliament and MPs to have last say on contentious issues. Also contained in the Daily Nation. In fact, here it reads, let me zoom in a little farther. Can you see it? Yeah. Okay, so move like towards the first column, last paragraph. The final report and proposals of the committee will include a list of agreed and unagreed issues. The final report and proposals of the committee shall be submitted to the respective coalition leaders. In addition, the final report and proposals of the committee shall be submitted to the leaders of the majority and minorities of each House of Parliament. It adds that upon submission of the final report and proposals of the committee, the leader of the majority party and the leader of the minority party of each House of Parliament shall table them and ensure that any proposed reform is introduced in Parliament. ODM Chair John Badi and Kitui Central MP Makali Mulu, on the side of Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Coalition Party, described the provision as malicious and deliberate. They said the talks would only have a meaningful outcome if the committee reached consensus on all agenda items before submitting them to Parliament. This provision is very dangerous. I don't know why our team agreed to include it. It will create space for people to develop a hardline stance on certain issues. Kenya Kwanza will get their way because they have a majority in Parliament. The committee has to agree and finalize its report before it is tabled. The team was set up to agree not to submit a report for Parliament to decide on. And then Mr. Mulu Wiper MP said taking the contentious issues to the plenary would put the opposition at a disadvantage. The issue of numbers would come into play. Let the dialogue committee try as much as possible to reach consensus on all the issues. Anything they do not agree on should not be included in the final report. Raila alicheswo.
Yes. You see, the funny thing is that they've agreed. They have a silent agreement, which is to amend the constitution. And their way of amending the constitution is courtesy of the parliament. They don't want to have a referendum. They want to avoid anything under Article 255 of the constitution that would warrant a referendum. So, and that is why you see they talk about having these things in parliament and it all. But now, with the new developments, it clearly tells you that when it goes to the floor of the House and it's meant to be voted for, obviously Kenya Kwanza will win. And the memorandum, or rather the directive that the president sent to Parliament when he ascended to office, both speakers will actually come to light. So at the end of the day, yes, they are going to amend the constitution. That is their plan. Whatever they come up with, I'm sure they want to put in there things like Office of the Leader of Opposition and the Musalia seat and CDF, so that they avoid court cases, courtesy of CDF. But truth of the matter is that after the board meeting, obviously someone will feel aggrieved, because if right now they're already crying and it's not in Parliament, if agendas that they have not agreed see the floor of the House and it goes to voting, your guess is as good as mine, who will be out here crying.
Correct. All right. Kidi, I'm just going to pull up, because you had written to that's the update you gave us last week, right?
Yes.
As the Inter-Parties Youth Forum, you had written to the two co-chairs,
yes.
Kalonzo Musyoka,
yes.
Kimani Ichung'wah. I'm trying to find that particular provision in the agreement itself. I don't know if I will succeed before I move on. It should be at the bottom, right? On, okay, I can't find it. I'm going to leave it there. All right, but now to your letter, inclusion of the youth in the National Dialogue Committee. We write to you under the auspices of IPYF, an entity bringing together youth leaders and political parties, youth leaders from political parties across the divide. Our agenda is to create a platform that champions the cause of young people in Kenya. And however, we have noted with great dismay and concern that the voice of young Kenyans is absent at the dialogue table. We, the youth, make up the bulk of the Kenyan population and are actively involved in the social, economic, and political affairs of our motherland. Despite the foregoing, we remain excluded from pertinent conversations concerning our existence and livelihood and contribution to our country, Kenya. We draw your attention to Article 55B of our Constitution that requires the state to take measures to ensure youth have opportunities to associate, be represented, and participate in political and other spheres of life. And the National Dialogue Committee, as currently constituted, does not respect this constitutional dictate. And finally, you say here it is our collective desire, a desire which we reinforce with deliberate effort on a daily basis to be at the decision-making table in every sphere of Kenyan life and society, especially where we stand to be impacted by those decisions for the entirety of our existence in this country. To that end, we ask in the spirit of inclusion and good governance that a representation of Kenyan youth be included in the National Dialogue Committee. Truly, there is nothing for us without us, and the IPYF is ready to send an emissary to represent Kenyan youth as we continue to champion for inclusion and representation of young people and hope for a positive outcome from this engagement. Kidimwaga, convener, IPYF. Now that you have not heard back, but there is a proposal in this agreement I was flipping through. Where is it? Here we go. For public participation. Are you satisfied with that, or are you ready to move to court?
Olive, one thing is that there is this analogy that we have constantly used in the youth space, that whenever it comes to matters of decision-making in this country, young people are treated the same way we treat children on Saturdays afternoons out, where people go and then the children are told, now you can go and play outside on the, what is it
Jumping
called?
castle?
Yes,
Bouncing castle.
on the bouncing castles.
The slides.
Reducing youth participation in this process to mere public participation, to give us your petition, tell us what you think, and leaving it at that would be disastrous at best. So what we will be, young people are insisting, and they have called me, most of them, they have called my other leaders. We have the programs officer here and other young people. They are saying that young people should and must be included. And they have reminded us that among the 5 needs of young people, being education, training, skill set development, and employment, the 5th one is the question of representation. That they cannot make these decisions and purport to be addressing the needs of young people while they were young people 20 years ago. In a span of 20 years, so much has happened, so much has changed. And therefore, to have the experience of young people, to make decisions with the experience of young people in mind, young people need and must be present in that table.
All right.
And we are willing and ready to send a representative.
Advice, Mundalo, do you support, does the Interparty Youth Forum support the Interparties Youth Forum in this endeavor?
I see what you did there. I'm very serious. But be that as it may, I think on the agenda perspective, that is actually the right agenda, because youth participation in this country has not been taken very seriously. And especially on the side of Azimio, if there is anyone who was supposed to really frontier the youth participation in this, was supposed to be the Azimio coalition, for the basic reason that before we got there, it was basically because of demonstrations. Now, demonstrations were actually steered by the youth. That's why you saw even in the arrests, the people who were arrested among them was Babu Owino, who is one of the people that is considered a youthful parliamentarian. Now, the people who died during those demonstrations were 100% youth. Most of them, I did not see any other age bracket. Those people are young people. It is unfair that after that participation, after the deaths of young people, when we get to now the cornerstone where we need to have that conversation, there is exclusion of then the youth who really made us get to this point that we are. So it is true that the participation of young people in very serious processes has not been taken as seriously as it should be. But I can assure you, if these talks fail, and we don't hope that they do, then you will see the mobilization again will go back to young people for them to again go and defend whoever will have been disenfranchised at that point, or whoever will be feeling like talks have not gone their way. For them to make a statement at that time, they will again need to go back to the young people. But when they are having the conversation, where now the meat is literally being talked about, where people are now on the table, where the talks come with allowance, now young people are not there. But when the talks are on the streets where there is no allowance, other than tear gas, that is when we want to prioritize the young people. So it is true, I agree with the agenda, that truly that should be the way to go as a country. If anything, we are here to live longer. If those talks are anything to go by, they affect us more than they affect any other person, because if nature has to take effect, then we stand to live longer than the rest.
Yes. All right. They agree on the agenda, Nurdin Hagai. All right. Well, I found the portion of the agreement that I was looking for. So what do you call them, these numbered things? Article. Is it an article?
It should be like an article, yes.
In an agreement, they're called?
Yeah.
Clauses.
Yeah? Clauses.
All right. So clause 38. The final report and proposals of the committee shall contain a list of agreed issues and those not agreed upon. The final report and proposals of the committee shall be presented to the respective coalition leaders. In addition, the final report and proposals of the committee shall be submitted to the leader of the majority party and the leader of the minority party of each House of Parliament. And upon presentation of the final report and proposals of the committee, the leader of the majority party and the leader of the minority party of each House of Parliament shall table them and ensure that any proposed reform is introduced in Parliament. Any solutions agreed by consensus that require changes in public policy shall be recommended and effected by the state as appropriate in accordance with the Constitution and the relevant laws and regulations. Do you see a loophole there?
Any solutions agreed? You see,
By consensus.
by consensus. So consensus is relative. So we wait to see what the consensus is all about. But in relation to what they said, because now this means issues of public participation. So you arrive there, you give out, and I remember last week I was here, I actually told Kidi, one thing's going to happen. You'll be given a forum to appear and make noise, make very loud noise. So they have to make noise. And the noise they make that particular day, I told them, two things will happen. It will either be lip service, and once they're done, they're told, shut up, Shanice. Yapa yapa. Or whatever they say makes sense and is incorporated in whatever resolution they come up with. Now we wait to see. But if the public participation that we saw under the finance bill is anything to go by, I can tell them that unless they get involved in that process, if their only venture will be public participation, then their die is cast.
Okay.
And it is in stone.
I think, Olive, we should not also reduce the importance of public participation. Public participation is a process that really is enshrined in our Constitution.
I tend to think people have been burnt many times before.
That is the way that people actually, again, not everyone can be on the table. Yeah, despite the fact that we're saying it is important and crucial to have young people on the table. But let us again not reduce the importance of public participation to mean it is basically a place where people go and shout and whatever they say is not important. We have seen public participation be able to have an impact. For instance, during the finance bill, and we're able to see some taxes even come down from what they were before the public participation. So it is not really a useless process per se. I would not want to agree that it's as useless. We were able to move from, was it 3% to 1.5? Even the tax for the creatives was able to also come down. So public participation has actually been able to play a role. And so sometimes we have what is just pure politics, political expediency, like which it can be helpful sometimes. Like that letter that you just read there is purely political expediency in terms of whether it will really have any impact is not as much. But the issue is if you actually focus on the reality that the process has actually, the train has left the station. What remains is public participation. And therefore, how good can we be able to make our agenda felt at that public participation stage as well? So that we don't concentrate also too much on political expediency and forget the reality of actually just being, of moving this train forward. So I don't agree with my brother Nurdin when he makes it look like, and he's a lawyer. So I think he does not need to kill the importance of public
I've seen the side eye that kid is throwing you because when you said this letter is political experience.
It's purely political experience.
Nurdin responded, then I'll come to you.
Clearly, whatever he said didn't come out clearly to my brother. You see, public participation is very important, more so to people like we who practice the law. Okay. Now, the problem with public participation, which have had an issue to date, the number of cases that are in court courtesy of public participation, we always talk about the threshold. Now, those who run these affairs public participation to them, and that's why I said, to them, they see it as more is more or less like a formality, in that they already have a decision, all right? But what do we have to do? I'll give you a good example. They already have uniforms for the police service, all right? The IG was seen wearing the uniform months ago, but now they come up with 3-4 uniforms, A, B, C, D, to show that in case anyone goes to court, they say, oh, by the way, the public participation. That is not public participation. That is why I'm saying public participation is very key. But at the end of the day, what we do in this country is a charade, because it's more or less like a formality to prevent public interest litigation that comes after the acts that we are doing. So what I'm saying to my brother here is public participation is very important. And when they call you, appear. And if you need me, I'll go with you, appear. But all I'm saying is the difference between actually making sure whatever you say that makes sense is seen in the report, and just looking at you as you talk and they sip tea or water or coffee, whatever they're taking, and that's what I call lip service. The difference is in how they take the resolutions you take there and how they treat you as you do your public participation. So I don't have a problem. I can never have a problem with public participation. My problem is how we conduct it in this country. It's more or less a formality to avoid public interest litigation matters. Now I think I'm clear.
All right.
Just jump in on that as well. During the public participation, before the passing on of the Public Finance Act, we saw the overwhelming majority of Kenyans object to the revisions that are being made by William Ruto. But nonetheless, notwithstanding the fact that the majority of Kenyans who showed up in person and said, do you know what, hatutaki hii bill, hatutaki hii sheria, hatutaki hii housing levy, we do not want any of these things that Ruto is proposing or the parliament is proposing, notwithstanding the overwhelming majority saying, no, we do not want that, it was never taken into consideration at the point of assenting the bill to law, at the point of revising the bill as well. It was what people were saying was never taken into consideration. Now, if you have people come in and participate and tell you, you know what, we do not agree with this, in as much as, you know, you've proposed it, you've brought it to our attention, we do not agree with it, and what Nuruddin is saying, they're only doing this for, to comply with a certain threshold to avoid public interest litigation. And that is why it's very important for young people, again, to have a seat on that table in the decision-making at the National Dialogue Committee.
All right, but what do you say of what advice, and by the way, when you were speaking, advice was giving me this expression. So.
Let me come in and say it.
What is it? But Kidi, yes. Advises the train has left the station.
Oh, well, you see, one thing all of you must appreciate is that IPYF brings together 17 political parties. And therefore, at every stage, you must consult with all the members and then take a united position. And therefore, as the convener, I am acting with the express instruction from the members from these 17 political parties. The other thing I must say is that fatalism is not something that we can entertain as young people. Of course, there are people who would, can afford fatalism and cynicism because possibly they are coming from parties that have, had access to government legies and stuff. But I think that apart from personal privilege that people can accumulate, there is need for young people to come together, especially in this point in time, to make sure that, number one, the structure of the national dialogue is conducted in such a manner that it answers the question for the majority of the people of this country, including but not limited to young people. Secondly, that it is proper that we ensure that there is no political fallout. We put sufficient pressure that there is no political fallout, that then inconveniences the young people the way they must action inconvenienced young people. My brother Mundalo has said that among the fatalities, 100% of them were young people. It is not one life lost is one life too many. So we are coming into this conversation, particularly as young people, saying that we believe that we can build a better society. And that better society can be built on the basis of inclusiveness and in observance of express dictates of the Constitution, as we have pointed out.
Okay.
So we are alive to the fact that, of course, there will be naysayers, but that will not distract us.
Okay, and advice, do you want to try to reply, or should we move on to the topic of conversation? Mambo ni mawili. Sinaambia sasa mambo ni mawili, either respond ama tusonge.
No, I don't know what exactly I'll be responding to. Actually, my issue was basically about what Gashui talked about, that nobody listened to the public participation during the finance bill, despite everything, without her remembering that the legislators, the parliament, carries people who represent the people as well. And therefore, that is why, after this process, it went to parliament. And the representatives of Kenyans voted for the finance bill. That is the voice of Kenyans.
Okay.
That is the voice of the people. So it's not true to make it appear as though Kenyans were not listened to. All parliamentarians and legislators in this country represent all of us who are out here. And if we have a problem with it, we recall them.
All right.
Yeah.
And Gashui, that is why he was making this nini. On a light note, advice on a light note. Yeah, anyway, so mambo ni matatu sasa. The president, speaking about Mumias Sugar, said the cases that plague it, where is that? Front page of the Standard. Here we go, ziko hapa. Get withdrawn, or you will leave Kenya. You will, what was the second one was go to jail. The third one was go to heaven. Nuruddin, first, just your general thoughts on that statement, because Amnesty International Kenya spoke out against it. The Law Society of Kenya spoke out against it. And the third party was the Kenya Human Rights Commission spoke out about it. I'm forgetting somebody in that list. Am I? No, it was those three, right? And then they invited the religious leaders to speak out against it, right? But online, there has some people have expressed
support,
not really support, but have made light of the statement. So what do you make of that reaction? Do you think there should have been a stronger repulsion?
Two things. I do agree with LSK when he says the statements he made, more so the one to heaven, is a little bit scary coming from a president. And it seems like the constitution has been suspended. We have to agree on one thing. Number one is we have an issue. Our biggest problem in this country is corruption, which is very true. But you see, the sad reality is that how we've handled corruption in this country. Corruption is only dealt with if you are not more or less closer to the powers that be. Proximity to power always helps those who have issues. We saw those who had issues before getting vetted for cabinet slots. Their cases were withdrawn before the vetting day, so they don't get questions on such issues. We've seen issues, people are crying out in Uasin Gishu. We've seen action taken, that was with Mandago. There's another problem I was following the other day in Senate, courtesy of the lady. We've seen governors misappropriate funds. We've seen the national government do the same. So we have to agree as a country, one, we have to solve corruption, because once we do that, we are going to protect the issue of misappropriation of funds. But number two, the problem I have with the statement is that when you say you're giving directions people to withdraw cases, so what happens to separation of powers? You see, in as much as you don't like a particular case, there's something we call in law fair trial. Let everyone have their day in court. If they win, they win. If they lose, they lose. I saw, again, yesterday, the issue on judges, and the issue that came out was more or less on stay orders. Now, you cannot have a problem with stay orders. There's a reason why we have stay orders. Yes, are there issues in the judiciary? Do we have judges that people have been complaining there are issues of corruption? Yes, it's true. But as you solve that, then you cannot then go away and start saying you have problems with stay orders. Because at the end of the day, so what are you trying to tell us in essence? You are aggrieved that the finance bill suffered whatever it suffered before it was appealed against, and then whatever is happening right now. Are you aggrieved that the cast never got to office because of certain decisions? So are you then telling us that you had a hand in the transfers that happened in the judiciary, where judges who made decisions in the cast case have been transferred, where judges who made a decision in the finance bill have been transferred? So in essence, are we going back to the dark days? That is the question LSK is asking. You see, we see people making jokes about go tenda binguni, sijuni. Until it starts happening is when you start making noise. But the sad reality is that we have a constitution. The president, whatever he said, you know, I don't, because I've heard him say such things before. Biblia chini. So I take it as that. But at the end of the day, we need to come up with the realization that we are in a new dispensation. We have a new constitution. This is not the independent constitution that was mutilated. So he might be aggrieved. I see here there are more or less 10 cases that we now hear one has been withdrawn, courtesy of Rai. But the question we ask is, do we have cartels in this country? Yes, we do. But let me ask you a question. So if you are ranting just like I about cartels, so who is supposed to solve the issue? And these cartels are not ghosts.
He has told you how he will solve the issue.
You see, that is not how you solve issues. You see, I might have a problem with how he wants to solve the issues. Because at the end of the day, even those who are seen to be criminals of the highest nature deserve a day in court. When you say things like going to heaven, so how are you going to heaven? There's no bus ticket to heaven. There's no flight ticket to heaven. There's no SGR to heaven. Okay. There's only one way. And it can't be the expressway.
Kidi, allow me to bring in advice, Mundalo. I have to be very conscious. You know, he accuses me every time he sits there. He tells me I ignore him. So I am not advised. But do you think this is an indictment of the courts?
I think, first of all, Olive, it is not right that somebody would say that transferring judges means somebody has interfered with the courts, because transfers happen every day. So every time there is a transfer, you want to accuse the president of having transferred anybody. And
it is not the president who's carrying out. It
falls
under the Chief Justice.
Exactly, and it's not necessarily a wrong thing. Yeah, we even have people who request for those transfers. So it is not right to make it look as though being transferred is something out of the ordinary. Tomorrow, Olive can be transferred from morning show to lunchtime news. It doesn't mean then the president will have called NTV. So for me, it doesn't. The accusing the president of such small issues, I think, is unnecessary. But then coming back to the reality of the issue, yes, I agree that that statement might have been a little to the extreme. But then I want to also look at the veracity of the issues that the president is dealing with. We are talking about the sugar sector, like Nzoia Sugar, where the employees of Nzoia Sugar have not been paid for over 2 years now. It's 1.9 billion in arrears of salary. So we have families, and I'm not even talking about the farmers, and that's just Nzoia alone. When you go to Mumias, like these are people, these are real Kenyans, real lives, who have extremely been disenfranchised because of some cabal of people who want to play games with the sector. And talk about corruption, I don't know why we keep thinking that when you talk about corruption, then you mean the executive. Corruption is in all levels of this government, including the judiciary. And part of the corruption in the judiciary can be stalling some of these things, even in these industries. And so the president is talking from a point where you have looked, remember the president receives intelligence about this country every other day. So he knows what is going on. He is not like me and Nurdin, who would be reacting to newspaper headlines. So the president understands the veracity and the depth of this real issue. And that's why when he comes out to speak, he knows who has been affected. He knows the families that are not able to put food on their table just because some rich people somewhere are playing with the courts in the name of justice. Yeah? So it is true that there is a real issue in the sugar sector. It is true that the president needs to really come out and solve the problem. It is true that Kenyans expect the president to solve the problem. And therefore, when the president starts handling it, we don't again quickly rush to start saying, you see, now he's threatening whoever and whoever. If anything, we're able to see people even start to withdraw those cases. It actually questions how important those cases were in the first place. That means it's actually true that somebody was just in court to be able to play games just to ensure that some type of people are able to be sustained within this sugar sector. So I agree, as a person who comes from Western, I would tell you, Olive, that we have people who are suffering heavily because of these games that are being played in the courts. We have people who are really, the farmers, children have dropped out of school there, down there in the Western Kenya. People have not been paid for that long. We have families who have lost people because of depression and frustration. So it is not just a matter that we must look, we look at from the surface value. The president is right when he says this is something he wants to face head on. Right. And therefore, the solution must be found.
I don't agree that just because they withdrew the cases or they have pulled out. necessarily equates to there was nothing there. Perhaps they have bowed to pressure of intimidation, because there was a video of this guy being abducted, allegedly. And then the statements, do you take, if the president spoke about you and made those, would you take it lightly?
First of all, when you say they bow to pressure and there was abduction, I agree that there was abduction. But relating it to the president means that the president abducted somebody, which is not true.
No, I've said allegedly.
Yeah, yes. So, and what you're saying is perhaps and allegedly. And what we are sure about that is not alleged is that somebody has withdrawn the case. So allegedly, and perhaps the case might not also have been as important.
That's true.
So we cannot be able, so because we don't know about the both extremes, then allow me to be right also in saying that the cases might not have been to the reality of the issues, but just about somebody playing games with the court. It might also be true that somebody is just using the courts to be able to sustain themselves within the cabal of the sugar sector. Right. The sugar sector needs a real solution, because you have been able to know.
I want Gashri to come in, right?
Yeah, I'm about to allow her come in.
No, let me allow her to come in now. What was I saying? Yeah, the courts. Is this an indictment on the courts? But before I invite Kidi to speak to that, because I'm looking at my clock and I need to take a break, but quickly, Gashri. Look at this headline. Oh, heavens, why Ruto is on the spot. Is he really? He has not only doubled down, he has tripled down on what he said, right? 2 days subsequently after he said what he said, he repeated it. And he said, this is not a threat, this is a promise.
Well, first of all, I hold very serious sorry. I hold very serious reservations on the statement he made, yeah? Very serious reservations. First of all, Denda Binguni, how are you going to heaven? 2, you will leave Kenya. Are you threatening to have people flee the country or deport them forcefully like Miguna? And thirdly, go to jail. At the same on the one hand, you are casting aspersions on the judiciary, but at the same time, you are threatening to incarcerate. My take is, first of all, William Ruto is in violation of Chapter 4 of the Constitution with said remarks. Number 2, there's potential for a return to authoritarian rule that we saw during the Kanu reign in the 1990s. Thirdly, there's intention to kill dissenting voices in this country. And we're also looking at a country where the commander-in-chief, who heads the National Security Council, is making certain remarks that are very, very dangerous for somebody with that kind of power in his hands. It is true, we have a crippling problem with corruption in this country. We need solutions in this country, but solutions cannot be made when you're undermining institutions that should be at the forefront of the fight against corruption. Instead of intimidating the judiciary, instead of constantly criticizing and interfering with their work, why not empower them? Why not give them leeway to do what they need to do? There's something Mundalo had disagreed with on the issue of transfers. For those of us who practice, we understand. Certain transfers are actually a reaction. Political. Yes, they are a reaction to statements or decisions made by judges and magistrates in this country. We have the EACC. What is the EACC doing? How has Ruto supported the work of the EACC? We have the Ombudsman. What has he done to support the work of the Ombudsman in this country in the fight against corruption? So I do hold reservations to what William Ruto said, and it is my hope that in his wisdom and the wisdom of the people around him, he will be able to look back, take back his statement, and actually find a way of moving forward as a commander-in-chief and not as a roadside proclamation politician.
All right, so we need to take a break, but Kidi, I know you have been very impatient. You're impatiently waiting for your turn, but we will come back with you. But 2 questions arise for me. Did you expect the judiciary to have said something by now? And 2, okay, it has escaped me. I will remember during the break. See you on the other side.
you're finally released from pain. That moment when you start to get back to ordinary, and ordinary feels amazing. Whatever pain you're going through, release starts here.
In every corner of Africa, leaders rise. From corporate pioneers to sports champions, innovative minds, and creative souls. You are the leaders of tomorrow, and we want to celebrate you. Are you a leader in your pack? Nominate yourself or someone you know for this year's Top 40 Under 40 and be part of the movement. Visit www.top40.bdafrica.com to submit your nomination.
Are you ready for a challenge that could change your life? Introducing #Nation Scholarship Challenge. We all know that getting an education can be tough, but we also know that a scholarship can make a huge difference. That's why Nation Media Group and Goodwill are giving you the chance to win 80,000 Kenya shillings. All you need to do is to post a video telling us why you want this scholarship and how it will help you achieve your goals. Don't forget to use the #Nation Scholarship in your post. It's super easy, and by taking part, you'll be part of a global community of people who are all working towards their goals. So if you're thinking about pursuing higher education or have big career aspirations, this is your chance to take a step forward. Don't wait too long. Complete your Goodwill profile and share your story with us now.
This week on The Trend, as usual, the Trend Trio, that's Osoro, DJE, and your host, me, Amina Rabah, will be there to start your weekend right. The Trend, every Friday only on NTV.
My lips, your lips, they touch, we kiss, and we kuna.
Own your dream home for as low as 1.98 million Kenya shillings in Vipingo Kilifi. SMS Vipingo to 22365 or call us today on 0740 400 215. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome back to AM Live. I remembered during the break what the second thing that came up for me when I was listening to you guys, and it was, this is a president who, when he took office, was categorical that he would not exercise extrajudicial powers. Kidi Mwaga, did you expect the judiciary to, by this point, have said something?
I want to imagine that the chief executive, the CJ, has possibly had a conversation with the president in this, but then because the office of the CJ is a creation of the people of Kenya, I think right by now the CJ should have come out and speak to the people of Kenya on what she thinks and believes is the way forward in light of these pronouncements by the president. Olive, I will tell you that it is, of course, it is Professor Kothogendo who mentioned about Africa suffering the problem of having constitutions without constitutionalism. How constitutionalism begins to chip away is when statements like this have been made by the head of state. The words of the head of state are not mere words. And if anything, usually every regime has got what you call overzealous members of the executive. Sometimes also overzealous and rogue members of the executive, whom on account of the mere statement by the head of the state, even if the head of state was speaking tongue-in-cheek, they would swing in action and descend on the people that they thought that the head of state was referring to and crush them completely. This again coming when we have seen videos of the abduction of the said investor. We think that it is a moment to proceed with caution and call out such statements. I know my brother is defending the president because he could be coming from the sugar growing area. I also come from the sugar growing area. And growing up, Sony was one of the finest industries that side of the world. People whose children were there, I mean, there were people we could not compete with. But then, as the president is trying to restore the vitality of the sugar sector, I believe, and legitimately so, that we have donated sufficient powers to the president to be able to do this within the confines of the law. If and when he felt that the cases in court were frivolous, I think that there were mechanisms, one of conversation, him as a head of state, and the other, on one hand, and secondly, the investors, people who are, of course, when there is capital flight, when investors leave a country would get into a serious crisis. So as someone who believes in building investor confidence, if those matters were to be withdrawn, there were better ways to have them withdrawn. There is better ways to ensure that the sector is revived without resorting to means that may appear extrajudicial. If anything, rule of law is a taproot upon which good governance is hoisted. And we must never depart from the rule of law.
But Noordine, perhaps the CJ is reading the room. And the room is telling her that the courts have failed us. And therefore, what options are left?
You see, I hope and pray we never get to a point where the courts fail us, because that means there's no country there at the end of the day. People say there's this, people like saying the courts are the last line of defense, which is quite true, because when someone who's in high office can encroach and grab your land, the only place you can go is court. You can call a media house and make noise, and if they don't help you, nothing will happen. So at the end of the day, I believe, like he rightfully said, I hope she talks to him, and I hope they have a conversation, because we do have 3 arms of government. And the drafters of the Constitution were not mad when they put the article of separation of powers. We need to have separation of powers, because you cannot have a situation where every arm of government is controlled by one, like in the dark, as people say, the dark days. You know, those dark days.
Very dark days.
We can never go back there. And so the declaration, or rather the statements from the president, shows that in as much as he's trying to make it look like a joke right now, and courtesy of, he reminds me of my good friend, Jiga. For those who don't know Jiga, that's Jay-Z. He says, allow me to introduce myself. So he's trying to introduce himself and make it look like a joke. It can't be a joke. The statement was, is a bit, it does give me a good taste. And I believe we can do better. Because if you look at, for example, the issues of the sugar sector, there are issues to do with bad politics, there's bad policy, the mismanagement, and there's this thing they're calling cartels. So we have to be very keen in that we do not replace, in quotes, existing cartels with new cartels that are now closer to powers that be. If we are going to have a situation where we are cleaning up that sector, that is the sugar sector, we have to look at, you see, it's best if the president does this thing in an orderly manner. Because when you do it on top of a vehicle or in a baraza, it doesn't change much. But imagine him doing it through an executive order. Then follow that up with a ministerial policy, and then the state departments implement the same policy. And then as you do that, Parliament has laws that actually take care of the farmers. Because there are farmers who feel aggrieved, courtesy of the Sugar Act. That is section, I think, 14, 15, and 16, where they feel that they can't turn the sugar into anything else. There has to be a third party. So you need to have a holistic conversation in that if at all you're eradicating or removing cartels, make sure you don't leave a space for new ones to crop in.
Cartels too, yes.
Because, or do not bring a situation where I remove these ones because they're not my guys. Let me bring my boys. We have to have a situation where also we have to look at the issue of importation of sugar. You have to talk about that as well, because you cannot be saying you have to drive Mias and you're importing sugar at the end of the day. Okay. You have to have a scenario where you solve this thing holistically from the top in an orderly manner, like I said, in an orderly manner, so that as it gets down here, the farmer feels protected, because there are farmers who invest in that, in actually taking care of their farm, but they get nothing in return. So let us not take this thing as a joke, as people are trying to make it. No, if you're fighting the cartels or the corruption in the sector, then I hope the same goes across board, not just in sugar,
right.
Across
so
board.
Advice will say he has special knowledge of the sugar sector given his roots.
Roots of sugar cane.
When you was talking, when you quoted the lyric from, it's the public service announcement, right?
Yeah.
Right, but advice, Mundalo, this is a president who swore to us that he would never resort to extrajudicial abuse of power. Has he crossed the line?
Not at all, Olive. Remember, this is the president who, on his first day in office, if there is anyone he really paid attention to, was the judiciary. He first of all appointed the judges that had been stalling there for a while, and two, he gave the judiciary a budget. So if anything is to go by, that shows how the president is very intentional about the judiciary and about protecting the judiciary as an arm of government. But what we might not also want to run away from is painting the judiciary as though it is the cleanest arm of the government. When we say there is corruption in government, the judiciary is just as corrupt as the other arms of government. You know, if this panel has 3 lawyers, and that's why there is a very deliberate attempt to try and make it look like every other place in government is rotten, but the judiciary is what will save us. So we must be able to understand that when we talk about corruption in government, the judiciary is part and parcel. Kenyans, if you go to the courts today, Olive, we have so many people lined up there whose cases have been stalling, they are waiting for those decisions for the longest time. Some have given up while waiting. So it is just as bad as it is in any other place. So making it look like there is sanctity there, I think is not very necessary. And when we say we want the CJ to react, I think let us again not pull the Chief Justice into becoming a politician. Because when you again want now to have the CJ also come out of what they are supposed to be really doing and to come and start issuing press conferences just to make maybe the legal profession happy or just to do political, it's purely what I've always said, that will be political expediency, just trying to paint a certain picture. So I think we don't need to pull the Chief Justice into this politics, but also, you know, I would want that.
You're the same one who says the courts stand accused. Who is the face of the judiciary?
I have not said the courts stand accused.
No, because you said there are people who line up whose cases have gone on endlessly.
And that is true. That is not true. That is true. That is not me saying. That is the reality as it is.
Exactly.
When you go outside there, you will be able to see that many Kenyans are also struggling because of the same judiciary. If anything, if the Chief Justice has to say anything about this, then he comes out to tell us what exactly is being done about those cases. Not to come out just to shape perception and do PR. Because that is what we want to pull the Chief Justice into. Okay. But then as it stands also on this same case of the sugar sector and the president's visit, I'm also wondering why we would reduce a 5 or 6 day visit of the head of state to a region where he launched industrial parks. There was a fish processing zone. Some TVETs were able to get accreditation. But all we want to look at after that whole visit is one statement that the president looked. I think sometimes also we are trying to shape the country into being extremely pessimistic. I think we must also start shaping the narrative of being optimistic as a country, because we can't always discuss only what would be negative or bile against the government. I've always said we don't make governments better by hating governments. I did not vote for this government myself, and I do not agree with everything they do. But then shaping a perception as though creating bile and inspiring Kenyans to hate government more will make it deliver, I think it's completely unnecessary. We must also be able to look at...
Is this shaping bile? Is this shaping bile?
Because I look at it like, why would a president's visit of 6 days attract a conversation about just one statement? I think we must also converse.
The nature of the statement.
But also the nature of the launching of the industrial parks is just as important. The nature of the launching of the fishery is just as important.
Let Gashwi come in. And Kidi, I know you want to come in, but you're responding to what Advice has said. He says it's true, because I interviewed the former Chief Justice David Maraga, and he said it is true. People take advantage of the court system with numerous adjournments. If you have money, you can drag out your case for quite long, with application after application after application before the actual substantial hearing of the case. He said it is a problem, and he had promised at a colloquium that was happening after that particular interview that he would speak to the judges about it.
One thing I've noticed from my, and maybe Nordin can support me on this, from practice in the past couple of years, and especially even since, what's her name, Martha Koome came in as the Chief Justice, is there is an intention, and the judiciary is very proactive in trying to move cases as fast as possible, applications as fast as possible, trying to do away with frivolous application, trying to do away with antagonistic or mischievous attempts to take advantage of the system and the judiciary for that matter. So again, I find it curious that the head of the judiciary would not issue a public statement regarding the president's remarks on the judiciary, yet in other instances, we see the judiciary issue, especially on Twitter, in real time, statements on certain incidents. When there was an incident in court, they will issue a statement. When Kenyans feel aggrieved by an ongoing case, they will issue a statement. They will tell you, you know what,
I remember when CSOs spoke out against, they had claimed the judiciary was present at the swearing-in of CASs and the matter was in court, and the CJ came out guns blazing against, and she named Diana Gishengo, although Diana said, Allah, I'm the only one who read the statement, I was not the only one who issued the statement. But yes, go ahead.
Yeah, precisely. It's called interference with the judicial proceedings. In certain instances in the past, the judiciary has come out very fast to make statements on, incidences and whatnot, controversies. So it is very curious that the judiciary would stand out on this one and with exception and not respond to the president. Is it that the president controls the judiciary? Is it that there is no checks and balances? Is this that there's no separation of power? Something else Mudalo said is, we need to also look at what the president did. There were certain good things he did. He opened TVETs, he visited certain areas, but the president is the commander-in-chief again. And I go back to the statement I made. He heads the National Security Council. He cannot be making those kinds of statements. He's the one who was up in arms when the Yala issue, the River Yala issue, and the bodies coming out of the lake, sorry, of the river coming out. Sorry, I am a bit confused. When the River Yala controversy or the scandal came out, he was the one who was fast, guns blazing, up in arms. This is wrong, extrajudicial killings. We cannot be overdoing, abusing power and whatnot. But suddenly now, the narrative tends to change. This is a man who was arraigned at The Hague over alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity. His record is not that clean, in as much as there were allegations, and I think he was acquitted. He needs to be very, very careful. He's not an MP anymore. He is the commander-in-chief. He heads the Kenyan Defense Forces. He heads the executive, and he has a lot of influence in this country. One thing you will notice, maybe in the past couple of days, again, for instance, yesterday, the MP for Gatundu North, I believe, he's the one who had an altercation with a law enforcement officer who was just doing his job. Okay, so when you have a commander-in-chief making certain remarks or moving out of his mandate and doing things that are obviously in violation of the law, the people who come behind him, state officers, MPs, we have a CS threatening an OCS, I think 2 weeks ago, and saying that she's going to transfer him because he didn't do what she wanted him to do. It is important, it is paramount that William Ruto understands he's no longer an MP, he's no longer a kawaida citizen, and he needs to be careful what he says.
All right. To borrow, perhaps when he was castigating those extrajudicial killings, when he was telling us about the container at Nairobi Central, ETC, perhaps to borrow some terminology from Advice Mundalo, it was political expediency. But Kiri Mwaga, which would you rather? Unataka nifanya nini? Au mambo ni matatu?
Olive, I believe in a government that delivers to the people. And because the president, in making those statements, he was making them in reference to his attempt to revive the sugar sector, I insist that it is important that the president inspires investor confidence. Investor confidence, part of how you inspire investor confidence is demonstrating in both word and deed that the political institution, the institutions erected in that country, things like an independent judiciary, things like equality before the law, that they are so supreme that if an investor comes in, puts his money, then he does not suffer the risk of one day an overzealous member of the executive who could wake up one day, have his properties taken over by the state for whatever reason. So that if and when there is a dispute, let investors know that there will be a judiciary that is independent, that is impartial, that will preside over their matters at least expeditiously. If not expeditiously, but at the very least, they will have their day in court and, you know, speak to their cases in an environment that therefore is predictable. To say that it is fine to tell investors, for instance, that, you know, they can leave the country, or they can go to jail, or they can go to heaven, then that statement is then put into context. That going to jail, this is not 1980, where the office of the AG would sign detention orders. This is 2023, where we have the Constitution of Kenya 2010. Before you are taken to court, I mean to jail, you must have your day in court. Unless that you are picked on your way home, the way we saw Mr. Rai being picked, and then he goes missing for 2 days. Mundalo has said that that people are alleging that that are people questioning if it is the president's men who picked him. We have not said so, but we are saying that can we therefore also know that where was Mr. Rai taken to, who took Mr. Rai, especially let the government use its instrument to establish that who picked Mr. Rai, where did they take him, and why is it so convenient that just when he resurfaces, then he withdraws his cases in line with the pronouncements of the president.
All right.
My view is that we must and should never tamper with investor confidence in attempting to appear that we want to be to quickly deal with issues. Okay. In dealing with issues quickly, we must have regard for the law. Thank you.
All right. Nurdin, I was about to go back to advice. Had I skipped you? Okay, I beg your pardon. I'm coming to you next. But two things. Hopefully, I will not forget the second one. But wait, what? It's Friday. Please, also, can we turn on the AC? It's so hot in here. It's really hot, right? It's so hot. I was just like this throughout.
Can I just because I am seated.
But I have a handheld fan somewhere. I'll fetch it. It's actually hot. So this administration is the one which revived the privatization agenda, right? And I will pull up the privatization schedule, but there were sugar companies. And we had Ndindi Nyoro say, if these companies are not making us money, then we may as well offload them.
Yes.
And there is talk of debt. The president said the debt is at 117 billion shillings. So how honest, in your view, is the president being in this furore, his anger around the monies that have been sunk into these sugar companies, public monies?
You know, first and foremost, they wanted to change the law in that Parliament didn't have a say in whether privatization could happen. Then there was uproar. Yeah. And that we smelled a rat, because why would you not want Parliament approval? Because those are things that belong to the people. And you look at, for example, the Mumias issue. The beef there is between two brothers, all right? There's Rai and there's the brother now. The brother is meant to take up Mumias, courtesy of his Sarai group. Now he's in court against that. So you ask yourself, whose interests have been protected? And that's why I said, if we're indeed fighting cartels, we need to fight and make sure that no other cartel comes in. And if we're trying to make the sugar work, we have to bring in policies that actually help the farmer. Because we know we keep talking about these things, but most people don't talk about the farmer. Now, before I quickly forget, there's something my brother said, advice. And you know, in law, there's something you say, point of information. All right? We have been told not to hate this government. I would never profess love, but I wish it all the best. I hope it succeeds. If it doesn't, we'll be here, we'll count. Now, you know, Waswahili wanasema, mcheza kwao utuzwa. Sawa? Na mimi ni wakili, right? And if I play well in my arena, of course the judiciary is going to say, that's our boy, you know? So now we've been told we are painting a picture as judiciary is perfect. I have never said judiciary is perfect. Do we have issues, even those of us when in the practice? Yes, we have issues. But what we are saying is, avoid a scenario where there are more or less subliminal intimidation tactics. You get, we saw with Uhuru, he had issues with say orders. We saw with Uhuru, had issues with orders that came from the court. Let us avoid having a scenario where we go back there, because this president is a beneficiary of the judiciary. And Raila was told to accept and move on after the Supreme Court, all right? So we have been told that let us not reduce a 6-day visit to just the 3 things that mambo ni matatu Kenya. But you know also in dancing, which I happen to be a very good dancer by the way, in dancing they say you are as good as your last dance. So you can do everything that is good until the last day. If you fail to dance when you're needed, when the judges have to put up points, then you lose. So we are looking at a scenario where we have statements that should not be made, which we seem are reckless in nature, but they seem to be made in a political setting, more or less to endear. I don't know, because who are we campaigning for? There's no vacancy. His seat is occupied by him. So I don't know what we're campaigning for, but it's Kenya at the end of the day. So you have a scenario where, we have a scenario where people are saying, let us not have a scenario where justice is hard to find. And this, quickly before we move on, this reminds me of a poem by Tupac to the judge once he was indicted. And he told the judge, I'm in God's mind, in God's hands. Do whatever you want to do. You can, I see there's no justice here. So we have to be very careful so that we do not have a scenario where the president is the judge and executor. Because if that is true, for those who are WWE fans, then he becomes the Undertaker. Where he comes, you're supposed to fight him. During the pro match, he tells you RIP. So before you're fighting, you're already dead. So we have to have a scenario where we agree there is separation of powers. Let everyone play in their own league. And we find a scenario where everyone has a day in court. Now we've seen the cases that have been withdrawn. But if they were public interest litigation cases, it's not easy to withdraw them because somebody else can pick them up. Okay. So let us not have a scenario where there's intimidation, number one. Let the law follow its course. Okay. If you win, you win. You lose, you appeal, and life goes on. Okay. Advice Mundalo, you have repeatedly today used the phrase political expediency. And you've told us the president was in Western Kenya. Was it 5 or 6 days? 5 days. 5 days. And we are only talking about this statement. But how seriously should we take the president's remarks? Is this about whipping up emotions towards a political end? Is this really about your people? Yeah, you can see, Olive, we are still talking about that same statement. A few minutes to close of the show. But then I think starting from where Noordin has just left, you remember recently there was a lawyer who was singing as part of evidence in court. And now my friend Noordin is also quoting Tupac. I don't know whether the judiciary is joining the entertainment industry. This guy. But that is on a light note. So what I would want to say is, one, it's not possible to intimidate the judiciary the way we want to allege and make it look like. The judiciary stopped one of the processes that was led by the 2 most powerful people in this country at some point. That was President Uhuru Kenyatta then and the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, the BBI. And the judiciary stopped the BBI. And that was it. And nobody forced it. Yeah? And then you come and even in this regime, the president appointed the chief administrative secretaries and the judiciary put a hold on it. And that was actually adhered to. So it is not true to make it look as though there is anybody who is interested in undermining or intimidating the judiciary per se. And then just before I come to your question about the sugar sector and the president's trip, there was a point that the president should be reminded that he's not an MP. I think that was not very right because MPs are not wrong people. MPs are not people who cause confusion. We should not make it look as though the profession of being a member of parliament gives you credit for you to make a mistake. So I think that tries to put our MPs in very bad light. So whether an MP or saying the president is not a common mwananchi, even common mwananchis are supposed to do the right thing. So I think that is that. And then there was a kid who talked about that the president is scaring away investors. The president did not speak to investors. The president spoke to thieves. The president spoke to corrupt people. The president spoke to cartels. The president was speaking to people who have disenfranchised the livelihoods of the people in the Western region. The people who have ensured that farmers cannot be paid. Those are the people the president talked about. The people who have ensured that employees in Mumias and Zoya Sugar have not been paid for the last 2 years. Those are the people the president was talking about, and not investors. So we must be able to draw a distinction between those two so that we do not misinterpret the remarks of the president. In essence, I really agree with, and I've said it again,
that there is a real problem in the sugar sector, and there must be a real solution. I agree with the president when he sets up to have real solutions in that sector, because growing up within that region, it was extremely different from what the region is today. Today, the region is purely not even an example of what it was before. So there must be somebody who will put a real solution to this. Remember, President Uhuru Kenyatta put money in Zoya and Mias at some point. But again, these cartels and these corrupt people were able to just take that money, and we don't know what happened, and still the farmers were not paid, and still the problem continued, and the companies did not start working. So it's a very real problem, and we must allow the president to really solve this. But then the entire trip as it was, I saw a lot of development projects being launched. I saw a lot of the industrial parks, and I think it's a very deliberate attempt that this government is using, where the president and the entire government goes down to the people, yeah, including the cabinet secretaries. Some of these cabinet secretaries would not see any other parts of Kenya until after 5 years.
Okay.
So even pulling them to have cabinet meetings out of this Nairobi is also trying to make them understand the reality of the problems on the ground.
So the people who are saying Rais amerudi juu ya gari kupiga campaign, you disagree with them. All right, so we have to end the conversation there, but I want to thank my panelists this morning. I was busy trying to find that privatization schedule, but I have not, like, it was really high up somewhere. You know, usually I have a group by myself and I send myself documents, but okay, I will wait. Here I see a report, Reuters, Kenya plans to privatize sugar companies. Do we just rely on that? Because, okay, I found something. Let's see if it will lead us where it needs to. I need to open my WhatsApp, so focus the camera in that direction. Thank you. Wow. Here we go. Yes. I fingers crossed. This is now you can cover. Yeah, okay, the National Assembly commences public participation, and this was on the privatization bill. But the schedule is not here. Okay, I will give up. But thank you for joining us. But it is here. It is somewhere here on the Privatization Commission website. If you pull it up, perhaps you will be able to get it. Okay, time will not allow me to Google much further than that, but my name is Olive Burrows. I've been your host. We've had Advice Mundalo. Advice Mundalo is not only the National Youth Chair Jubilee, he is also the Inter-Party, get right, Inter-Party Youth Forum Secretary General. We've also had in studio Gashi Kariuki, Advocate of the High Court, Director Ustawi KE, also Head of Programs of the Inter-Parties. Did I get it right? Inter-Parties Youth Forum. And we have Kiri Mwaga, Convener, Inter-Parties Youth Forum. You'll tell us whether barua yako ama utajibiwa ama utaenda kotini, or you will go for the public participation.
We have legal and political channels to pursue.
Okay, so far they have given them grace, extended some political goodwill. Nurdin Hagai, Advocate of the High Court and certified professional mediator and hip-hop head. That's it. Sherehe ni Sheria. TV meets radio up next with the Morning Fix. Good morning.